big processors have most of them have dropped all their contracts here in California with directly with their farmers, so that now they are buying their milk through a broker. And when that happened, we had we started the Western Organic Dairy Producers Alliance when we started in the organic industry, and that was to represent the voice of the Western organic dairymen. And it will bring me to tears just to think about the last 3 years and the stories that we heard from each individual dairy farmer and their families about getting a notice that their contract ended and having nowhere to sell their milk. And there were dairies that went out of business when they had nowhere to go with their milk. There were other dairies that were sold because they went bankrupt trying to find a home for their milk. And then we've had other dairies that supplied because they jumped on to sell their milk. But selling their milk to a broker does not mean they're getting paid for what it cost.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label distinguishing organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Rosie Burroughs, a Real Organic Project certified farmer from California, and she's a member of WODPA, which is the Western Organic Dairy Alliance. I interviewed Rosie last fall about the role of brokers and pricing in the organic dairy industry, and unfortunately not much has changed in organic dairy since then. Pay prices are well below the cost of production, and transparency is still greatly lacking. Brands ask us for blind faith in their sourcing. Meanwhile, confinement production in the arid West expands. I'm pleased today to welcome Rosie Burroughs to the Real Organic Podcast. I know her as the matriarch of Burroughs Family Farm, located in the central San Joaquin Valley of California. Hi, Rosie.
Hi, Lindley. It's great to be with you here today. Matter of fact, today started off with a wonderful gift from God. We had some light sprinkling this morning.
Our first rain. We always want that to happen in California, especially during fire season, which is kind of going all summer long now these days. You mentioned you had a fire in your
We actually had recently? A fire on our farm. They were starting the machinery to clip the cover crop to get ready for the olive harvest. And the blade hit a rock and started to spark. And that's so the fire started right in the middle of an olive orchard yesterday. Had 4 fire trucks out, and they were able to take care of it and put it out. I really don't know the extent of the damage. It happened last evening.
Oh my goodness. So you got to go out there and see how much was burned, huh?
Mm-hmm.
We refer to your farm as, a lot of farms are similar in the Real Organic Project, but we call them Noah's Ark farms because it's kind of like, what aren't you producing? So give us a quick rundown of your many operations at Burroughs Family Farm.
Our family farm legacy spans over 120 years on Ward's side of the family with his grandfather, Benjamin Burroughs. And in the late 1800s, he started. And in 1906, he created his first dairy in the Bay Area. And from 1906 through currently today, our family has carried on a dairy farming family legacy. Unfortunately, though, for us, we had 2 different dairies, one with our daughter and one with our son and their spouses. And our youngest son's dairy closed this last December. And that was, probably one of the most heart-wrenching, difficult experiences that my husband and our family have had to go through. But thankfully, we have a daughter, and her dairy is still continuing on. So when Ward and I first started in 1974, we started in a family partnership with Ward's father and his brother, and we continued that on for about 25 years when our children started to graduate from college and wanted to come back into the farm. And at that time, our paths were different, so we split off the partnership, and then Ward and I were on our own, which was like a blessing, and it was like a double-edged sword, because while we ended our partnership that we felt very comfortable in, we were on our own, but then that allowed us to bring in our own children, which eventually all of our children have followed the path of being involved in production agriculture, and they really are, it's in their DNA. They love what they're doing. And so all together, we have almonds, beef, chickens. We make some cheese for seasonal projects, dairy, eggs, a whole menagerie of projects in the middle, including horses and goats and lots of different kinds of dogs that we raise, guardian dogs, working dogs, border collies, and kelpies. And with all these enterprises, then the last two projects that we've added are olives and sheep. So this last year, we've just completed our first year of a whole enterprise of grazing sheep.
Wow. So it is like, what aren't you producing?
It's very fun. And then the children have their own projects. So we also raise hogs and rabbits and their own project chickens and 4-H projects. So it is a menagerie of little projects, and it changes as the children have been growing up.
What kind of acreage are we talking about here? And is it all in one location, or are you kind of spread out?
Well, as we've been dividing our place up, we operate here in California in the San Joaquin Valley on approximately 3,000 acres. We do have another 3,000 acres of rented lease land that we have. And then in Oregon, we operate on a forest and a farming acreage that is about 5,000 acres.
We've talked a lot about scale in the Real Organic Project, and as long as the production practices, aren't compromised, then scale, organic isn't scale limiting. However, with dairy, it seems like it really is, because you need to get those cows into a milking facility twice a day and then back out to pasture that they can actually graze on, not just, pasture that doesn't have any forage on it. So, a little bit about scale and what is possible with, what we would consider to be organic dairy. Could you talk a little bit about that? And
sure.
Is there a scale in dairy beyond which you aren't comfortable that you can actually be grazing the cattle back and
Well,
forth?
I'd absolutely be comfortable with that, because that was one of our greatest projects when we started grass-based dairying, and then organic regenerative grass-based dairying, is that we were devoted as a mission statement to produce the highest, best quality of products through organic regenerative practices for our consumers, which also included ourselves and our staff. And I never really liked clumping words like large or mega dairies versus small family, because I don't think it matters what size you are. It matters whether or not you're following the rule for organic standards in grazing, in reference to the dairy business. And for us, and we're pretty lucky, because we have more days probably than folks in the Midwest, or even maybe in the East, for the amount of days that we have sunlight, which would also equal to the amount of days that we can graze. And what we figure is that a minimum, you have to first answer in general terms. So generally, your pastures at the highest quality, you should be able to graze 1.4 cows per acre. And that would mean, and if you were going to just put it in general terms, we'd say you should be able to graze 1 to 2 cows per acre for 150 days a year. And one of the things that people or certifiers really don't encourage is that you should encourage them to graze more days if possible. And there are locations in the U.S. where you can graze more than 150 days per year. So
right,
I'm going to give you an example.
I think the minimum is 120, and there are a lot of people that saw that minimum and thought, well, great, that's all I have to do. But
Right.
It really is what the grazing season is in your location.
That's right.
And,
It's supposed to be designed.
What is it where you are? How long is the grazing season?
Every year will vary depending on climate, right? And climate can be either rainy or wet, where you can't take cows out to pasture, or they can damage your pasture if it's wet and soggy. Or it could be days when it is so hot that cows will want to bunch up and not graze because they're too hot to graze. So it could be either too wet or too hot for grazing days. And I can't speak for anyone else other than our own family, but there are many years that we could graze more than 160 days per year.
And so it also has to do with how much irrigation water you have too. Has that been an issue in this really dry year we just had?
Here in let's just talk about California. California farms in the Central Valley definitely have irrigation, and that can be either pivot sprinklers, flood irrigation, or wheel line moving. Those would be the three types of irrigation. Up in the north part of the state, we do have dairy farms that have similar types of irrigation systems, and we have other dairies that have absolutely no irrigation. So those farms that had no irrigation at all, then their grazing days would be based on their rain, on their rain that they're receiving each year. So that
1.4 cows per acre, is that what you're saying your situation is, and it's not across the board, or is that kind of a general rule of thumb?
I'm going to say that this is a general term for practicality and discussing grazing practices, and getting to what you were asking about grazing is that, say that you have 4 pivots and there are 160 acres, on each corner, and you place your dairy barn in the middle of that. To us, in our experience of how we've been grazing, then that would mean that your cows should be able to walk a mile for milking to graze to the barn for one of their grazing places, and then less than a mile for their second grazing throughout the day. So let me explain that again. Cows come in from pasture to graze twice a day in our system. So we can use up to a mile away of pasture that they can graze in, and then they come in to milk, and then when they go back out, the next pasture that we'll turn them into is a little bit closer, so that you're not having cows have to walk 4 miles a day to come in for milking.
Sure,
so we're using that scenario. I guess the best way kind of the maximum to answer that question would be, so if you had 1,000 cows, and you had, say 700, what we have is 714 acres, you would be able to graze 1.4 cows per acre.
Okay. And so when you see numbers, you can go to Aurora Organic, and thank goodness for transparency, they're actually putting these numbers up, because a lot of them don't. When you see 12,150 cows on 7,000 acres of pasture, that's less than a cow per acre. That's about half a cow.
Yeah,
half an acre per cow.
Yeah.
Does that seem like they're following the grazing rules?
It's simple math, and if you scale out 1 mile from the dairy barn, that will tell you how many acres you have and whether or not it is possible to graze that many cows next to a dairy barn. And I would say it's not possible.
Okay, so this huge growth in larger dairies with less pasture has really impacted the industry. You want to talk a little bit about what you've noticed over the years in terms of supply and demand for organic milk? I know there was a time when all the consolidation happened in the conventional industry, and it seemed like organic was a haven for people to make a go out of it in organic dairy. And so the number of organic dairies expanded for a while, and then the consolidation happened in organic as well, and we've seen the number of organic dairies shrink. Is that something you've noticed?
Our experience in the organic dairy industry has been since about 2003, when we started our first organic dairy. And in the beginning, the price was a fair price and made sense for us to get into organic. But it wasn't soon after that the price just dropped. And you would hope that supply and demand would be what dictates price and people wanting to get into a new project. But there were several things that happened along that journey for organic dairy. There were some requests that let the legislation expand to let more animals into the dairy business in a program that they called transitioning, so that there could be more milking cows. That was one thing that happened. And so there was a lot of people that were already dairy farmers in the conventional world that then looked at the high prices that were being paid to farmers and then came into the organic dairy business. So there was a huge volume that entered in a very short time. It wasn't controlled or moved in a way that could be handled in the market to work with supply and demand. So there was an overflow of milk for a few years. But I would say that what has hurt the small family farm, organic dairy farm, is the fact that the USDA through the NOP has not been enforcing the organic rules, in particular in regard to the pasture rule.
How could they do that really simply? This is not a difficult one to enforce. Do you have some suggestions there?
I think that it's up to the certifying agency to train their certifiers, and I've seen different formulas from different certifiers that they use. But I think more importantly, common sense of just looking at the number of cows, knowing how many cows can graze per acre, that should give you a big clue right there in those basic math figures to know whether or not a dairy is complying with the organic rule.
What about unannounced inspections as well on, say, a 70-degree day during the grazing season?
I think that the records, being able to look at the records, you still can look in a bulk way. If you've got 15,000 cows on an acreage that doesn't support the grazing period, then flat out you know that they're not grazing. In terms of just having surprise inspections where it's part of the organic rule and everybody that is in compliance will be open to that because that is what is expected.
So what effect has that had on the industry, on prices and on the survival rate of farms?
So I wanted to share this because I don't think enough people understand what has been happening for us here out in the West. But I put these numbers together this morning just to show you what our personal experience is. So if we started milking in 2004, and that's when we joined shipping milk, and we ended in 2021, in the beginning, back in that period, there were just a few family farms. And then by 2009, we did a survey of our local co-op that we were shipping to. And in 2009, we had 23 families that were on 15 dairies here in the San Joaquin Valley and here in California. So that's in 2009. Now we're in 2021, and of those original dairies, there are only 2 dairies left in the San Joaquin Valley. Now there are more dairies here in California that are in the northern part of the state and here in the Central Valley. I think there's only another 2 dairies here in the Central Valley from our original 2 that were here in 2004. So that means there's only four dairies left total in the San Joaquin Valley. That's how far the numbers have dropped.
And that's just in your little spot. I think the same trends have happened all over the country in that same time period. Of course, we just heard about, what's happening with Danone dropping 89 dairies in New England, or 89 contracts in New England over the next year, and completely stopping, to pick up any milk from the states of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Eastern New York. Would you say that's, maybe they were stupid in deciding to do it all at once instead of just picking them off one at a time? Kind of what happened in your region to go from 23 down to 2? Was it a slow attrition, or was it kind of one event all at once?
Well, there were various events that happened in our experience with the dairies here. Some of them had to do with transitioning dairies that were conventional, trying to transition to organic, and there was supply management implemented, and they weren't able to capture the the income that they needed because they had to cut down on the volume they were producing. And that was one issue that happened to several young farmers, young dairy farmers. But then there were also older people that could not make that transition of the 3 years to organic without getting paid enough to keep the operation going. I would say that the most tragic thing that happened is that, and this is talking in the past, I'm not going to say that for today, but I would say that it felt like there was a monopoly of processors that were handling the milk, and there were so few of them that dairy farmers have been paid what they are given. They are not paid what it costs them to produce the product. And when you eventually run out of equity and you have bills that need to be paid, you're not getting paid enough to stay in business. And so for us, that took us, we probably stayed longer than we should have, but we lost a tremendous amount over the last several years.
When I interviewed John Eichert, he talked about the larger operations expanding while there was low pricing going on in order to completely dominate the market and kind of drive out the competition. Does that seem like that's what was going on to you in your area?
Well, for sure, I would say that anyone that's handling milk wants to make sure their supply is more than they need so that they can fulfill their contract obligations. So I would say that's a practice that every processor and every broker make sure that they have as a tool in fulfilling their contracts.
Would you explain, you just brought up broker, would you explain, because this is really foreign to, I think most people don't really understand how this works. Like why do you have to work through a broker, and what kind of, before you get to the processor, and what kind of influence does that broker have over the price?
A broker is a middle person that is, and it can be between several companies, but it's generally between the dairy farmer producer and the person that is either going to buy the milk from the broker or another broker. There may be as many as 2 brokers involved before it gets into the processor that is going, or the purchaser that's going to be buying the milk for the products that they have. And so every time you have a middle person, that means their salary needs to be paid. And so every time you're taking more money that would directly go to the farmer continues to get less for his product because of the middlemen. And there's a whole string of middlemen besides brokers. You've got the distributors, you've got all kinds of different transportation issues that come into play. But it ultimately means less milk for the dairymen. For us, here in California, there are just a handful. There's just a very few brokers that are handling the milk. But what happened to us here in the West over the last 3 years is now happening in the East. Some buyers of milk did not want their contracts directly with their dairy producers. So when their contract was going to be up, and everybody's was at a different time here in California, the buyer would say, okay, your contract is up in so many months, whether it's 6 months, 9 months, or a year. And we're notifying you, according to the contract rules, how much time is required by that contract to let them know at the end of this contract, we are not going to be buying your milk directly from you. Your contract is going to end. And everybody had a different timeline depending on what their contract said, and then also how much pressure was also given to those buyers on dumping so many contracts, at a very short time period. Over the last 3 years, there have been many contracts that have been lost or ended. And so the brokers then are the ones that are purchasing the milk. And basically, the dairyman has no power to say this price is too low, or I'm not going to sell you the milk, because dairymen generally have bills to pay month by month, and they can't just stop sending their milk. But the worst thing is that there's not enough buyers to buy the milk. So those that are buying the milk have contracts with their brokers to make sure they're supplied. So they're able to still continue purchasing the milk they want and when they want, but they don't have to worry about the overage when they don't want it. And that's where a balancer or balancing comes into play, because say a buyer only wants a certain amount of loads, he has overage of extra milk that's produced, then the broker is going to balance that milk. So he's going to either sell it conventionally or find another organic buyer that would buy it.
And a lot of this isn't transparent, right? So that the dairy farmer gets a check from the broker sometimes later, right? After the fact, they've sold it, and they have no idea how much the broker actually made by selling the milk. And so the broker could say, I didn't get anything for it, or I got a very low amount. Isn't there a lack of transparency in this whole thing?
The contracts for dairymen and the way the system works for the organic dairy industry is there is no transparency on price. Matter of fact, the dairy producer has a contract, whether it's with a creamery or a buyer, broker, whoever it is. I don't know of any contracts that are transparent and that the dairyman can share what he is getting paid for, nor do I think that any of the stores or retailers or whoever the buyers are that are buying from the broker, they also have their own contracts that have clauses that say this price has to be kept in confidentiality. There is no transparency between any of the line of exchange in selling organic milk. Big processors have most of them have dropped all their contracts here in California with directly with their farmers, so that now they are buying their milk through a broker. And when that happened, we had we started the Western Organic Dairy Producers Alliance when we started in the organic industry, and that was to represent the voice of the Western organic dairymen. And it will bring me to tears just to think about the last 3 years and the stories that we heard from each individual dairy farmer and their families about getting a notice that their contract ended and having nowhere to sell their milk. And there were dairies that went out of business when they had nowhere to go with their milk. There were other dairies that were sold because they went bankrupt trying to find a home for their milk. And then we've had other dairies that supplied because they jumped on to sell their milk. But selling their milk to a broker does not mean they're getting paid for what it cost. And it's very doubtful that any dairy farmer here in California can survive on their dairy pay price solely on dairy, because many farms, if they have equity, then they can last a little bit longer. But if you have debt, there's no way to pay off debt with the pay price that we were receiving here in California. So of those dairymen, many of them have just gone out of business in this last 3 years.
It's so frustrating to hear this story because I know that over this time, COVID hit in the last couple of years, and organic sales have skyrocketed. I mean, we're up over $60 billion industry now, and the demand for organic food has continued to go up. Really, it doubled, I think, or double-digit growth over the last year. And I'd like to I'm just really confused because milk is often like an entry point for organic. So all these customers that are kind of realizing, they come into organic because milk doesn't have antibiotics, affiliated with it for organic, and the health effects of the animals on pasture in actually getting better milk, and also just the humaneness of keeping animals out of a CAFO. So how is it that I know the demand is rising? We know the demand is rising just based on the data, and yet the farms are going under. What is going on there?
We have a broken system. We have a broken food system throughout the U.S. And in this broken system, it's very hard to survive when there are so many obstacles. So it's just not a matter of the price not being fairly paid to the dairymen, but it also has to do with those that are producing the products and all of the difficulties they have. So there's a whole system in the retail business about shelf space, about loyalty to their previous customers, about whether or not they're going to let another brand into the store. And that whole system is completely broken because it's not based on any kind of transparency whatsoever to the consumer or to anyone down the line. But when a company, in my opinion, loses their connection with their farmer and they're going through a broker, there's no direct correlation or obligation to make sure that that farmer is getting paid a fair price. So the farmers then, there are only a few places that they can sell their milk. That's the problem. Is it's almost like a monopoly, or not even a monopoly. I know that there are some places that are in desolate places, desolate locations, and people now are looking at, okay, how can we cut our costs? Well, it's very easy to cut someone who has transportation costs than it is for someone who's closer in. There's a lot of reasons for why dairy farmers are having trouble. But I think if we get back to honoring and making sure that the dairy farmer has a fair pay price, that would reflect well for fixing our system and keeping things moving forward.
It's so ironic you're talking about fair prices, and Horizon, who just dropped those 89 contracts, they're a B corporation, which means they're supposed to be taking into consideration the triple bottom line, not just profits, but also the environment and the social side of their business. Does this seem like it makes sense for a B corporation to have dropped that many farmers all at once?
So think about it. If we don't care about what happens to the family farmer, then it goes to corporate, and so corporate's going to buy from corporate.
Yeah, we really need to get those relationships back into the system, and the lack of transparency is what enables all this to happen, it seems like.
Right. My comment would be that it doesn't matter if you're B Corp or whatever label you have for your company, but it's more about integrity, and so let's ask about what is the integrity of the companies who are dropping the organic dairy farmer.
Yeah, or not paying them a fair price either, like you said. And does that kind of change depending on the location? I've heard something like, $30 per 100. Is that an accurate amount for what it takes to make it work? Can you explain kind of pricing for a dairy farm?
It's going to be very difficult to give you a number of what it costs to produce milk from one location to another, much less one state to another. California probably has the most strictest rules and regulations, the more hoops that you have to jump through with paperwork, and the higher price for everything that we do here in California, from water, employment, and all of other requirements that are related to labor, and add land to that. So I don't think it's a cookie cutter for any one price that you could say from one place to another. And that's why across the nation, over the last 18 years, we've seen that there are different prices for different locations. Mainly, it has to do with also transportation, because originally transportation was taken care of by who's buying the milk, and over the last few years now transportation is being told that the farmer has to cover his own costs for transportation, and that's new since the brokers have been coming in. I want to go back to the brokers again, because some of the farms, when they lost their contracts, they had nowhere to go. They had maybe if a broker didn't have a buyer, he wasn't going to be able to take that person on. So when you have no place to go, then you have to fold. And so it breaks my heart, and in my mind, I can still hear all these dairymen from the western states talking about not having enough time to be able to figure out how they could save their dairy. The contract was going to end, and there was no one that could buy their milk. And that's not just in California, that was all the western states.
What role has the rise in these private labels of, Costco organic milk or Safeway or, I guess they all have their different names, but Walmart sells an organic milk, and that's called a private label. Do you think that has played a role in all this?
When you have a product that becomes a commodity and you are using private label, if it's not balanced, then it's going to be a lower pay price for the family farmer.
It seems like it breaks that chain of transparency that you're talking about that we need so much too, right?
Transparency,
there's no list of producers behind those private labels.
That's right, Lindley. Transparency and integrity are the two most important words that we need to instill in the buyers and brokers and processors and consumers of what we need in our industry.
Rosie, if the National Organic Program enforced the grazing rule and the origin of livestock, but it didn't address consolidation in the industry, would we still be in the same boat? Is it going to take more than the NOP actually enforcing the rules? I know it's a huge part of the problem. I'm just wondering if there's more to it, in your opinion.
Well, who knows where the future is going to lead, where our industry goes. But I believe that we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today if the USDA through the NOP enforced the grazing rule. And we know that the origin of livestock has some holes in it that are detrimental to those of us that are in the organic production side. But we need to first start with the inspectors being trained correctly and then being able to implement what the grazing rule is stating that they need to do. And we know it's not occurring. So that brings me to the next situation of what else would fix our situation. I've been thinking about this, and it seems like if you have the fox living in the hen house, you're not going to really have change. And there's two problems with our government agencies, and one is that I feel like our government, and I'm not going to be on either one of the political sides, so I'm not going to say it's just happening this year and didn't happen 4 years ago or whenever the change was, whether it's Republican or Democrat. But it seems like our government is bought. And so when you have people that are at the top in the enforcement and they tell their staff, no, we're going to drop that or we're not going to enforce that, then we have a completely broken system. So I think that when you have corporate power that can buy their people that they want in government to be their voice, then it's going to be very difficult to make things correct. One of the other problems, as I was talking about the fox in the hen house, is that when a certifying agency, which is supposed to be non-biased and independent, if they're getting paid by the farms that they are certifying, and you have one farm that has 5,000 organic dairy cows and you have another farm that has 100 organic dairy cows, is it likely, do you think, that the certifier is going to want to put out of business someone that has great number of cows that are paying based on their number of cows to the certifier for that certificate? So we have the fox in the hen house with the certifiers. I think we need to change the system so that money doesn't influence whether or not you're getting certified or not. And whether that's through their own certifiers and what they're getting, or from corporate companies that are putting pressure on to not decertify a farm that they need that product from.
I know that OFA, Ohio Ecological Food and Farming Association, they are very proud of the fact that they have a flat rate so that, I don't know what the price is, but it's $1,000 or whatever to certify any operation, no matter how big or how small. Does that seem like a solution to you?
I like that idea because it doesn't put their payment in jeopardy of whether or not they're decertifying a farm or not. It should be all the same. Matter of fact, yeah, okay, I'll just leave it there.
No, I completely agree with you. I see the certifiers blaming the National Organic Program for failing to enforce and pass the origin of livestock. But I think that is weak. I think that they have every ability to enforce these rules themselves and that the power's in their hands and that the farmers should be revolting against the certifying agencies who are allowing this to slip through the cracks. So I'm very much, I think that these problems that we have in the organic industry could be solved by certifiers with integrity. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. It would change the change the whole industry, and I think it would balance out, and that supply and demand. If you don't have an abundance that you can lower the price, then the price would come back up for the family farm.
Well, thank you, Rosie. I've picked your brain for a long time today, and I know you're still in the middle of a busy season and dealing with fires and sick grandchildren and everything that farmers deal with on a daily basis. So I really appreciate your time. Is there anything I didn't ask you today that you want to say?
I just wanted to say that I applaud and am very pleased, and I have a lot of hope that the Real Organic Project has created so much awareness about some of the problems that we have in our organic label today. And I do wish that the Real Organic Project would become a certifier, because that's the thing I think could change moving forward. Just think about how this would look if all the farmers that felt like the certifiers are not doing their job left those certifiers and went to certifiers that they felt did. That action alone would show the confidence that we have in ourselves to get certified by a different certifier than the ones that aren't implementing the rules and regulations that we need to be enforced. So thank you to the Organic Real Project. I am so pleased that you are taking the time to learn the issues that we have that are causing us to not only have hardships with financial insecurity, but also to try to keep the farmers on the land. So, as I said in the opening, I think it's our greatest resource we have in our country today is our organic family farms on the land producing food for those of us who need to purchase our own food.
That's so interesting, your solution there. I wonder if it would fracture our movement, because there are so many good certification agencies out there, more than it would bring us together, but it certainly is tempting.
Yeah, there are some good ones, and those that are good, their farmers would stay with them because they believe in what they're doing. So I don't think it would fracture at all. One of the things that's difficult is some of the brokers, because they're selling to different buyers, there may be some buyers that want the milk for just GMO free. So we have to have a label for that. We have other buyers that are selling for animal welfare. There's two different certifying agencies that different buyers want. So there's those two added to the GMO free.
Are you referring to like certified humane?
All the different,
and what else?
Whatever a buyer wants to sell, whether it's organic or conventional, right? So say that they're wanting to buy and put something in a carton that is non-GMO milk, right? Or pesticide-free product, or whatever it happens to be. It's already included in an organic label, but they want this other label so that it fits their criteria for their buyer, for their market of what they're selling. So even though it's certified organic, that may not be the label that they need because they're going to take that milk product or milk and they're going to sell it to a buyer that doesn't care about organic, maybe only wants the GMO-free label, or maybe they want another kind of a label, another different kind of humane label. So it's been burdensome for farmers to have to continue to get more and more different kinds of certificates. And, I've teased about this before, but your dairy farmers could then become Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts with, badges that have all the different labels. But it's not the answer to have all these different labels. We need labels that have integrity, right? And that's what the Real Organic Project has. Transparency. That's what we need. We just don't need more labels. And that's why I think that the Real Organic Project has brought that to the forefront. People are saying, well, why do we need an organic Real Project label? And why are they, what's going on? So then we talk about, the vegetables that have been grown in hydroponics, and that was never meant to be an organic label. And yet, how did that get passed? Right? That's huge. It's really huge. That's not a living life cycle. When we talked about what does it mean to be organic, it means to be working with the earth. And the roots need to be in the earth to get the biological activity of the microbes working together to produce the nutrition that needs to be in that plant.
It's so obvious to a farmer.
Mm-hmm. Right. So our family through Burroughs Family Farms applauds the Real Organic Project, and we hope that through this communication, we can have a voice that can be heard to our consumers, to our brokers, and our processors about holding up the integrity and transparency in ensuring that our families stay on the land to continue our good work.
Well, thank you for doing that good work and for sticking in it. And, if the dairy didn't work out for your family, you're farming in other ways. And so for being so adaptable.
Well, we're trying sheep right now. So that's our big new enterprise. We're grazing sheep. So
I'm just so happy to hear that. I mean, it wasn't the end for your family.
It was very difficult for the members of our partnership. But I've always liked some wisdom that was given to me that in the journey of life, whatever comes on your path, whether it's difficult, hard, sorrowful, happy, whatever it is, accept it and learn from it and become a better person for it. And so I just told my husband and our partners that, okay, so this door has closed, but now let's just be open to asking God what's next for us and where he wants us. Right now, he wants me here today to tell our story.
Well, we are very grateful that you did, and I appreciate how much time you gave us. Thank you so much, Rosie.
Okay. Thank you.
Best to your family, and keep busy, even though you're retiring. Keep your hands dirty,
There's
right?
no such word as retirement. We may not have partners, but we'll have special projects for sure.
I'm counting on it. I don't doubt it for a second. Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you will subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review. A video version of this interview can be found at realorganicproject.org/episode 77. Please join us next time when our guest is Ed Maltby, Executive Director of the Northeast Dairy Producers Alliance, to continue our investigation into the problems in organic dairy. To support this podcast and our certified farms, become a recurring donor at realorganicproject.org and get the benefits of being a real friend, which is our book club, where you have the opportunity to ask many of our favorite authors your questions. See you next time.